Okay, good evening and welcome to the July 22nd, 2021 edition of Building the Scottish State, coming to you this evening from Sant Cugat, not far from Barcelona, where it's beautiful weather. It's a shame I can't share that with you, but the light contrast doesn't look very good. Anyway, but I'm very happy to have with me Tommy Sheridan this evening to talk about the state of the Yes movement and the current state of Scottish politics. So first of all, Tommy, thanks for being with us this evening.
Mark, it's one of those very, very rare occasions when I'm going to have to say to you, we don't need you to share your sunshine because we've got plenty of our own here, and we have had for the last few days, which is remarkable. We actually hit 29 degrees in Scotland today. I think it's one of the warmest warmest days on record. So there you go. That might make you even feel a wee bit jealous, Mark.
All right. So how do you see, I mean, how do you see the current state of the independence movement in Scottish politics? We had, of course, the Salmond, affair, and without delving into too much of that deeply, what that showed us about the way that the Scottish government functions or doesn't function properly. And also, of course, the way that Alex Salmond and later Craig Murray has been treated. How do you see all of that, and how do you see that in concert with the state of independence?
Mark, it's one of the most overused words is probably crisis. People will use the word often when there is some trouble, mild trouble, and they'll use the word crisis, and it tends to lose its potency because it's overused. I don't think the independence movement is yet in crisis, but the truth is we have a political leadership problem. We have a party that for many, many years automatically was given the mantle of the political leadership of the independence movement. It was given that mantle because it was a party that was formed with one purpose and one purpose alone, and that was to lead Scotland to an independent state, to return our sovereignty. And the SNP, for many, many years, it had a very, very tiny level of support. Then in the late 60s, early 70s, began to pick up a few percentage here and there. And it always had one, two, as high as four MPs in Parliament, but it never appeared to endanger the British state. And then what happened, of course, was the 2011 Scottish Parliament election, and a very unique set of circumstances developed, a set of circumstances that will never develop again because there was a conflation of the support in the list and the support in first past the post, maximising the number of SNP seats, meaning that remarkably, something that was not supposed to happen because of the political agreement that set up the Scottish Parliament originally, there was never supposed to be a majority for any political party, particularly for a nationalist political party. And what happened in 2011 is all of that was confounded when a majority was secured by Alex Salmond. That majority, that political earthquake, led to the pressure on David Cameron to succumb to a referendum demand. The idea of a referendum demand at that time, you have to remember, and it's very important for everybody watching this, that at that time, you go back and look at the Scottish state of opinion represented in the Guardian opinion polls and Scotsman opinion polls, support for independence was around between 23 and 25%. And that is the fundamental reason why David Cameron agreed to a referendum, because he believed there was no danger to the British state. He believed that Scottish independence only had 23 to 25% support. There was no chance of an independent Scotland emerging from that referendum. However, the electoral result of 2011 put the pressure on for the agreement in 2013 to have the referendum in 2014. And Alex Salmond led the campaign, and in those days there was no questioning of the political leadership of the SNP. I and others had disagreements with the white paper, which was the basis upon which the SNP fought that independence referendum. They produced a white paper which had several elements of it in terms of their vision of an independent Scotland. I mean, one of those elements was, for instance, a slimmed down monarchy. I've got to say, Mark, I'm not interested in a diet programme for the monarchy. I want to starve them. I want no monarchy whatsoever.
I'm very much a Republican as well.
Well,
I just don't see any
similarly,
point.
Mark, I also recognise that there was at that time a belief that we should continue to use the currency of the pound, and that we didn't need a national bank. Was lunacy as far as I was concerned. I said at the meetings that I spoke at, 121 meetings up and down the country, that it would be absolute lunacy for an independent state not to have its own currency and not to have a central bank backing up that currency. And the other element, and this is a controversial one, Mark, and it's one that won't get universal support in the independence movement, and that is the European Union. I'm a socialist, fundamentally a socialist. I don't believe the European Union is a force for good. I believe the European Union is a very bureaucratic, undemocratic organisation whose whole aim is to promote capitalism and the free market economy. It's not to encourage democracy, it's not to encourage sovereignty, and it's certainly not to encourage war on poverty and inequality, which is what I would like to see an independent Scotland embark upon. So from my point of view, that white paper had loads of weaknesses, but that didn't matter, Mark, and this is important in relation to your question. It didn't matter that we had disagreements with the white paper. People like me and Hope Over Fear and many others in local yes groups across Scotland, we said all of those questions can be put in the back burner. What we need to do is win the referendum. We need to get yes, we need to get an independent Scotland. Then we can fight about whether we want a monarchy. Then we can fight about whether we stay in the European Union. Then we can fight about a currency and a national bank, all of which are very important things. For instance, being a member of NATO. Goodness sakes, why would you be a non-nuclear power but want to stay in a nuclear organisation in the shape of NATO, a very pro-militaristic organisation? So these are questions which are important. I'm not saying they're not, but the most important thing was to win yes. So we campaigned, we all pulled together, and we almost got there. We went for that 23, 25 up to 45%. The difference this time round, Mark, and this is the fundamental point that needs to be learned across the independence movement, is we're not at 23, 25 any longer. We're at 45 to 50. And no British Prime Minister worth their salt is going to agree to a referendum on the basis that Scotland's already at 45, 50%, because they then run the risk of being the Prime Minister that broke up Britain, that lost Scotland. And it's from that point of view that the SNP has become, in my opinion, a party of devolution, a party that doesn't believe and doesn't promote independence any longer. It says the right things at the right time to win elections, but it does absolutely nothing concrete to deliver a process towards independence. We have had, I seen a collage the other day of national headlines, that the national newspaper headlines over the last 4 years.
I've seen that same thing.
And they were incredible. It was all about Indy Ref 2 now, Indy Ref 2 on the horizon, Indy Ref 2 next year, Indy Ref 2 next month. A lot of utter Tommy rot, utter nonsense. We have got nowhere near. We've had an election in May where the SNP fought it characteristically, saying, give us both your votes and we'll pursue independence. And of course, many people who didn't understand the internal machinations of what's going on within the SNP, the fact that there is a war against those who reject this gradualist approach. This gradualist approach is, Martin Luther King used to say, those who say wait really mean never. And that's what the gradualist...
letter from the Birmingham jail. Exactly. Absolutely.
So from my point of view, there is now a crisis of political leadership, not necessarily within the independence movement, although it is beginning to be reflected in the independence movement, Mark, because there is a greater degree of fragmentation now than there has been in a long, long time. And I think the COVID problem is feeding that narrative. When you're not meeting with people, when you're not holding hands with people, when you're not marching together, you allow a vacuum to be created that is filled by a lot of poisonous diatribes and personal vendettas. And before you know it, you've got an independence movement where people are saying, oh, I'm no going with this one or that one, and this one's at it, and this one's at it. And people get an influence that, quite frankly, they don't deserve. But because of social media, then everybody thinks that they're a leader. I think leaders have to earn respect, and they have to earn the right to lead movements. And a lot of people have to try and bear that in mind. However, I don't want this discussion in any way, shape or form, Mark, to be a down, a cloud over the movement. Not at all. We are beginning to emerge from COVID. We're beginning to have the ability to meet again and to gather again. And I think as people do that, more and more of us will come together and realise that there is much more that unites us in the independence movement than divides us. While we're not...
I agree with that, but I do think that what's lacking is a catalyst, and that could be, that could be a date, that could be, something like that, but for people to seize on, because I think that there's a lot of people are somewhat despondent in the strategy of the First Minister to call the, Section 30 process the gold standard. And then if Boris Johnson doesn't give it, then there's nothing she can do. And so, I'm just, what do you think are some of the alternate means to get independence besides a Section 30 order?
Well, the problem is there is an inability, and there has been an inability over the last 14, 15 months to exert political pressure on the SNP. They were able to enter into an election a few months ago, and that election was effectively, it was a contest between Johnson and Sturgeon. And, people may have doubts and may have concerns about Nicola's direction of leadership. I share many of those doubts and many of those concerns. But I'm sorry, when it comes to Sturgeon or Johnson, I'm going to vote Sturgeon 100 times because I despise Johnson. I despise the Tories. I despise everything they stand for. They are the most despicable, dishonest, deceitful government that we've ever had. I mean, I lived through the Thatcher years and I despised her. And she hated the working class and she hated Scotland. But Johnson is at a different level altogether. This man is a tyrant, and the people around him don't believe in democracy in any way, shape or form. But because of the futile political opposition in England, he is able to rule supreme, not in Scotland where he's getting rejected all the time, but in England, unfortunately, in the lack of an alternative political strategy from the Labour Party, after they get rid of Corbyn, after the shock of 2019 when Corbyn almost won, the British establishment went into overdrive and destroyed Corbyn.
I'm sure the Israeli lobby had a good bit to do with getting him out.
Absolutely, Mark. I mean, come on. I've known Jeremy for many, many years. I was involved with Jeremy way back in met him in 1989 when I was involved with the anti-poll tax campaign, and I addressed the group of Labour MPs that was the left group that Tony Benn and he belonged to, him and Skinner and Dave Nellis, Terry Fields. And he was a lovely man then, and he's been a lovely man ever since. And there is not a racist bone in his body to in any way describe him as being an anti-Semite.
And they talked about there was this report with these huge problems in the Labour Party, and it's so transparently obvious. I mean, if you can't see the problem with in the Tory Party with racism just in general, and then you could see
you must be blind, politically blind, willfully or through ignorance. You are blind because the only racist party and the only racist leader in the UK right now is Boris Johnson, not Jeremy Corbyn. Never was Jeremy Corbyn.
And he's shown it.
Starmer is nothing
so
but a lick spittle of the
yeah.
British establishment. That's all. A lick spittle. I mean, it's in the name, isn't it, Mark? As soon as somebody accepts that piece of crap called a knighthood, then you realise that you've been swallowed up. You realise that you're no longer fit to certainly lead the working class and lead a Labour Party. But from my point of view, where all this leads us to in relation to the independence movement is, I think we are a bit disparate. We are at sixes and sevens. We're fragmented. We need to come together again physically. And I think there will be events. There's a big event going to take place on the 19th of September, Mark, in Glasgow, the annual Hope Over Fear rally. And isn't it fitting? Almost 7 years to the day. 19th September, we're going to assemble in George Square. We weren't able to assemble last year, so we had to cancel it, which was really, really unfortunate, because we've met every year since the referendum of 14. But we're meeting this year. We're going to bring people together. We don't, Hope Over Fear doesn't suffer some of the baggage that some of the other campaigns have developed. It's a campaign that's open to everyone in the grassroots movement. We're hopefully going to have speakers from all of the independent supporting parties. We'll invite the SNP officially. We'll invite the Green Party officially. We'll invite Alaba officially. All will be invited. The important point is there will be a focal point for us to get together and start to assemble again physically to exert pressure on the SNP. The overwhelming majority of people who voted SNP, Mark, in my opinion, and I was one of those that called for people to vote SNP won in the recent election in May. I wanted people to give the SNP their first vote. Not everybody in the independence movement agreed with me, and that's fine, that they're entitled to their opinion. But I believe we had to maximise the yes vote around the SNP. Second vote, I was calling for Alaba to get the second vote, because I wanted a strong independence opposition elected to the Scottish Parliament. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. These things take place. A lot of people derided the whole idea of a strong independence opposition. A lot of people didn't like Alec. A lot of people falling out with Alec, that type of thing. That's unfortunate. But the truth is, the SNP 1 and 2 vote did nothing for independence. Nothing. But what it did do is it kept the Unionists in power, but with plenty of voices in the Scottish Parliament. It gave them oxygen. It gave them energy. It's given them the light of day that they do not deserve. And those 1 and 2 advocates really should be pondering what they did and asking themselves if they have the full belief of the independence movement in their heart when they did that, because they've misled us. They misled ordinary people. We wasted our second votes by giving the SNP both votes, because all it did was give a hand up to horrible unionists to talk Scotland down, and that was wrong. So from my point of view, Mark, I think we've got to get back to the physical gathering, back to the physical campaign. We've also got to get issues back. The SNP gave an announcement just a few weeks ago. They said that we're going to suspend the drive for IndyRef 2 until Scotland recovers from COVID. In that sentence, in that statement that the SNP put up, Mark, it's just full of hypocrisy, and it's full of nonsense. The unionists must be loving it. They must be rubbing their hands with glee. Because if Scotland can recover from COVID while you're part of the union, why have independence? Why have independence? The truth is, Scotland cannot recover from COVID without independence, because the horrible scourge of low pay, of poverty, of failing public services, being starved of resources, all of that is related to the British Union and, of course, related to the COVID-related problems. We cannot recover from COVID without independence. It's hand in glove. So from my point of view, that illustrated for me, that statement from the SNP 3 weeks ago, illustrated for me the exact problem that we now have, that the political leadership of the independence movement is no longer up to the task. Many of them, quite frankly, Mark, they're not interested in independence. They're interested and how big their pension's going to be. They're interested in keeping their places in the Westminster Parliament, keeping their places in the Scottish Parliament. They're interested in the sinecures and the wee committee positions that go with being in these parliaments. Personally, I now think we have got to adopt within the independence movement a complete abstentionist proposal and position as far as Westminster concerned. They hate us down there. They ridicule us. They take the absolute rise at us all of the time. Why are we going there? Why are we going there? Thatcher used to say it herself. She says it in her memoirs. Anybody who doesn't believe me, go and read her memoirs. She said quite categorically that no one could stand in the way of Scotland becoming an independent country if a majority were sent to Westminster demanding that independence. Well, I'm afraid we did it in 15, we did it in 17, we did it in 19. We've got the majority. What the hell are they doing? What are they doing, Mark? I don't know what they're doing to promote independence.
I've had many people interviewed that have expressed the exact same thing, and exactly, and the whole idea of even if they announced a campaign tomorrow, what are they going to say? What is the policy to when people are chapping on the doors campaigning? What's the currency going to be? What's the relationship with Europe? All of these things that there aren't answers for that people will want to know, and so it just seems to me as if there needs to be a lot more planning going on like now. And the thing is, there has been so much. I mean, our groups and, the Common Weal. I mean, there's so much policy that's been developed out there. It's like, how do we bring it all together so that it's the substance of a campaign, do you think? Because
there's the old adage, isn't there? I think it was Moses that says, build them and they will come. I think if you were to announce, which is what the Scottish Parliament has to be pressurised into doing, instead of saying, as they have done, and at least 3 votes so far at the Scottish Parliament, where the SNP and the Greens have by a majority called for IndyRef 2. I think what the Scottish Parliament has to do is name the date for IndyRef 2, not call for it some distant future. Actually name the date, and it's going to be too late in 2021. Unfortunately, it should have taken place in 2021. It's not going to happen. Let's have it in 2022. Let's name the date in 2022. And once the date is announced, Mark, I think you will find that all of the differences, all of the squabbles will become less important, because what people have to realise is many things can be dealt with after independence. But nothing can be changed. Nothing can be changed until independence. And that's the fundamental problem we've had. I seen an SNP MP making a whole screed of comments the other day, very important comments about child poverty and the rise in child poverty and the consequences of the cut of the extra £20 a week that has been paid in universal credit since COVID. And these points were absolutely live, and they were absolutely potent. But the problem was there was nothing at the end of it. There was no realisation, there was no conclusion that what we need, therefore, is independence. Yeah. Because this whole problem with poverty and inequality, it is going to become on steroids in the next few years. Yeah. Do you think the Tories are going to allow anybody else to pay for the COVID bailouts other than the working class? These people are coming for us. Look what they did in 2008 when we bailed out the banks. Who paid for that? The pensioners and the unemployed and the asylum seekers. The public sector workers, they're the people that are going to be in the firing line again. And the only way Scotland can be protected is to come out of that horrible, stinking, rancid political union and start to build a new society based on the idea of compassion and love and human solidarity, investing in public services, investing in renewable energy, not allowing these tax dodgers in offshore havens who currently own a third of our offshore renewables. That should be a publicly owned industry developed in order to move away from fossil fuel to allow Scotland to become the world leader in clean energy technology, but to use the resources of that to feed into our education, to feed into our health, to feed into to proper minimum wages. All of that, Mark, isn't going to happen while we stay part of the British Union. And that's why all this stuff about recovering from COVID is rubbish.
I know. And what do you, if you were to take just based on, anecdotally, and if you were to take a poll of Scots, how many people would share your vision of Scotland? How do you think, what percentage do you think it would have a more neoliberal free market version, among Scotland? I know UK is different, but how would you gauge the political will to, of your vision of Scotland, socially solidarity, caring, all that, relative to a free market, let's just say, version?
Well, to be honest, Mark, some of what I've said, in fact, most of what I've said so far, I would argue, isn't actually socialist. It's more social democratic. Yes, it's left of centre. It's left of centre to believe that the renewable industry should be within public hands. It's left of centre to believe that the universal state and the idea of benefits should allow people to live with some dignity instead of living in poverty. The idea of a minimum wage that meant that you don't have to rely on benefits to survive. All of those things are social democratic. I would go further. Of course, I would go further. I think the oil industry should be publicly owned. I think the bank should be a national bank that is part of a public resource. I think, personally, that if we really want a steel and a shipbuilding industry that's going to be able to feed the public transport network, the new buses, the new trains, the electric cars, all of these things, then it's going to have to be publicly owned. That would certainly be more socialist. But a lot of what I've suggested, Mark, is basic justice, basic right and wrong. And I've got to say, sometimes people say it depends who asks the question in relation to the answer that you're looking for. If people were to be asked across Scotland if they believe the rich should pay more in taxation, if they believe that the minimum wage should be higher to prevent people having to rely on benefits, if they think more should be done to tackle inequality, I've got to say I think the majorities would be huge in favour of those policies. Now, obviously, when you get to detail about how to deliver these things, you might get more argument and more debate. But those are arguments and debates that we should welcome and we should develop. One of the things, sorry to be a pain here, but here's one thing that I think is very important and something that is more socialistic, but also common sense. We've got a National Health Service, which I think we should be very, very proud of. A National Health Service which we should fight tooth and nail to defend. A National Health Service, by the way, whose workers deserve a proper wage rise. I'm a big supporter of NHS Pay 15. I think the idea of a 15% wage rise for NHS workers is the absolute minimum they deserve. I've listened to some of these politicians, MPs, who since 2010 have had a 25% increase in their wages, telling NHS workers that they're only worth 3%. I mean, it just angers me so much, Mark. But we've got a National Health Service that uses daily millions and millions of drugs. Where do we get those drugs? We purchase them from the private sector. Doesn't it make sense that if you've got a public health service, that you have a public pharmaceutical industry to feed that health service?
Sure.
And therefore, here's one thing an independent Scotland should be absolutely champion. The idea of a publicly owned pharmaceutical industry so that we prioritise health, not wealth, when it comes. These are things that somebody say, oh, that's socialist. Well, yeah, maybe it is. But if you were to put that out to a ballot or an opinion poll, Mark, I would fancy my chances.
Well, I know. I mean, there's such a lack of knowledge of what socialism actually is. I grew up in the United States. Socialism equals communism equals Stalinism equals purges, and I mean, it's just there's no even attempt at explanation of what it actually means. And for me, it's just that the benefits of society are reinvested into society itself. That's my kind of basic definition, and not.
If you think about it, Mark, the reason the Tories despise the National Health Service is it's probably in and of itself the epitome of what socialism is, because it is a service, an essential service that is available on the basis of need. So whenever you need something, it is there for you. whether it be complicated heart surgery or whether it be a knee replacement or whether it be COVID treatment. No one reaches for your wallet. No one asks how much you've got in the bank. They simply give you the health care you require as a part of societal provision. To me, and it's why the Tories opposed the formation of the health service, they voted against it over 30 times in 1945, is because it actually is a glimpse of what socialism could be like, Mark. You provide essential services not on the basis of money, not on the basis of wealth, but on the basis of need. And I've got to say, that should be the same in relation to energy. It should be the same in relation to transport. It should be the same in relation to housing. It should be the same in relation to insurance. You know, this idea of pensions. Instead of having a whole plethora of private pensions, why don't we have a proper, publicly owned, publicly scrutinised pension system that isn't about the poorest getting a pittance? It's about everybody getting a decent standard of living in their latter years. All of that, Mark, in my opinion, is part of the socialist garden
I agree.
that flowers from.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what if you've been able to think about how this is actually enacted. And I look at the United States as an example, who became independent. Their 13 colonies were independent, and they had the Articles of Confederation, which was a very ineffective governing system, so they got rid of that. But they put in the Constitution, but the Constitution was a very aristocratic document. It made sure that the Senate was basically the power, and the Senate was the landowners, and basically their idea was that those who own the United States ought to run it. And so I'm wondering, if Scotland were to become independent only to fall into these same, kind of corrupt ways as the U.S. and the U.K., that would have been, that would be horrible. What do you think are the ways that we can actually, make sure that these types of visions are, instituted and at the very least considered, because a lot of times people don't even have the opportunity to consider such ideas. So how do you see implementing that vision?
Mark, I think the revolutions that you're referring to, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, these were social democratic revolutions. These were progressive revolutions. They developed society. They developed the concepts of society. They had huge problems. Of course they did. There were huge gaps. The Russian Revolution obviously was the first working class revolution, and the first revolution that actually tried, in my opinion, to bring about a fundamental change in the way society was actually organised. And to me, it was a glorious revolution. There have been problems. It's a problem to build socialism when you're attacked from the rest of the world and you're isolated. So there is obviously problems in building socialism in one country. But the truth is, all of these movements were progressive. The 1916 uprising in Ireland was a very, very progressive uprising. It was doomed to failure from the start because of the forces raged against the Republicans, against the Irish Republican Brotherhood and the participants, the Irish rebels. Many of them knew it was doomed from the start. But the truth is, they knew they had to rebel against colonialism. They had to rebel against imperialism, which is what that rebellion was all about. And what they did was they laid the seeds for the future emergence of an Irish Free State. And obviously, people will argue, yeah, but they didn't unite the whole of Ireland. Yes, they didn't. But they broke away from Britain. Yeah. Ireland is now an independent country, a 26-county country. They've still got unfinished business, and I thoroughly believe in the next decade or so that Ireland will be united and become a proper democratic country. But these movements were all progressive. And it's one of the reasons, Mark, I can't understand. You're talking about your American background and the left and the confusion on the left. I can't understand any socialist anywhere in the world who would oppose Scottish independence, because
No,
Scottish
absolutely.
independence is fundamentally an anti-imperialist movement. And, you know, if you're a socialist, you're anti-imperialist. I mean, you cannot be a socialist and not be anti-imperialist. And therefore, the idea that you're a socialist, but you oppose the idea of Scotland as an independent country, simply is anathema to me. It's silly, it's stupid, it's illogical, because when we break the British state, we break imperialism, we weaken imperialism, and we allow the people of England, the people of Wales, to begin to realise their own paths to a better society. Scotland isn't going to become a nirvana overnight. It's not going to become a socialist utopia overnight. I do think Scotland is a different country from England. It's just every election now shows how different we are. We reject Boris Johnson. We reject the Tories. We're a different country. People have to understand that. The only thing that's lacking is our independence, is our sovereignty. If we really want to develop the resources and the talents that exist in Scotland, we've got huge talents. We've got beautiful land. We've got lots and lots of people with skills and talent, but we're never going to be able to develop it while we're tied to that horrible, corrupt union in Westminster. So people say, oh, independence movement's anti-English. It's not anti-English. It's anti-Westminster. There's a difference. There's a huge difference. And we have to develop and understand and explain that difference. And so from my point of view, the idea of a written constitution and a new independent Scotland, the idea that we actually have written down people's democratic rights and responsibilities, all of that's important. I don't think we're going to win, Mark, if it was me that was leading the independence movement on a independent socialist Scotland programme. I don't think the majority would vote for an independent socialist Scotland yet. I'm not saying they wouldn't vote for it after we've our independence and we've shown what's possible and we've shown how much better we can do on our own and the potential we have to develop Scotland as a peace-loving, independent country, with promoting clean energy technology, promoting peace across the world. I think we could develop socialism in an independent Scotland. The truth is, we're not going to be able to develop socialism when we're part of Britain. That's for absolutely sure. So I want to break the British state. I want an anti-imperialist movement, which is what the independence movement is. And I want to be the left wing of the independence movement. I think the independence movement, to be a proper movement, has to have a left wing. It has to have that energy. It has to have that elan. It has to have that boldness. It has to be able to say to people, Mark, things will change. I mean, one of the problems with the Yes campaign, the official Yes campaign of 14, was there was far too much don't frighten the horses. There was far too many times people would say, oh, don't worry, there'll not be big changes. I'm sorry, but if you're going to change the constitutional arrangement that you live under, by Christ, let's have changes. I mean, why vote yes?
I mean, I saw that from the beginning.
I flags to change the bloody municipal buildings, Mark. I wanted the level of the pension to change. I wanted the level of wages to change. I wanted the education system to change. Instead of the private schools having only 10 and 12 people per class, I wanted the state schools to have only 10 or 12. I wanted to employ more teachers. I wanted every kid to have the same chance that a privately educated kid's got because they've got more invested in them. So, from my point of view, change is something we should not be frightened of. We should embrace it and we should make it progressive and we should make it positive. Scotland is a different country from England, Mark. You know that. I know that. The only thing that's different, the only thing that's holding us back is this constitutional chain that's round our neck.
Because I'm really wondering in whatever form the campaign takes to become independent, to what extent these things should be stressed. I mean, like, how precise should there be in terms of a constitution, in terms of saying, yes, we will have an independent currency, we will seek recognition in EFTA rather than the EU, or there would be, but the thing is that people know what they're voting for, and it's not just, if you vote for this, we will have a constitution, we will have this, we will have that. And the question is, how how do you get that official? How do you get that so that when people are campaigning and saying, yeah, when we become independent, we will have this, 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 and this, and having it the actual policy of the entire. I know that's not very precise, but if I could get your thoughts.
I get exactly where you're coming from, Mark, and I would argue strategically, and tactically, we have to concentrate on what unites most of us, so that we strategically and we tactically we concentrate on breaking the British state, leaving the British Union, allowing our sovereignty to be announced. We then, as part of that campaign, we say honestly and openly that there will be a plethora, there will be a blossoming of democracy. We will embrace referenda. We will say loud and clear, do we want a future monarchy? Do we believe a monarchy should continue to have any sinecures in an independent Scotland, or do we want a modern democratic republic? Let's put it to the people. Do we want to rejoin the European Union? Do we think the European Union is a progressive organisation that should be part of, or should we remain as partners of Europe, but not in the European Union, similar to a Norway or a Switzerland? Let's put it to the people. Should we have the idea of an independent currency with an independent bank monitoring that currency? Let's put it to the people. I think these things are important, but they're not essential to independence. Absolutely not essential. What's essential is what's in your heart. What do you say to those who believe that Scotland's not a country, that Scotland's not sovereign, that Scotland's not an independent nation? No, that argument has to be taken up. It's an emotional argument. It's a very, very important argument. It's an argument about our future. Do we shape our own destiny, or do we continue to have it shaped by people 400 miles away who don't give a damn about the working class in this country? I think the more you try and agree on before independence, then the more you lay yourself open to divisions and fissures around some of these questions. I would much rather see us unite around a simple yes question. And by the way, anybody that says that we should join, yes, and rejoin in the European Union is off their heads, or they simply don't want to win independence, because that would divide the movement. We go for a yes, and we say quite clearly that we want to then consult the Scottish people on the European Union.
I would say yes you could say yes with EFTA first, because EFTA can be joined quite easily.
Absolutely.
And there was nothing that prevents them from getting to. If Scotland does join EFTA, they can join the EU later if they want to. But EFTA would get Scotland back in the EEA and the single market quickly. So I mean, and I don't think there would be much I don't see EFTA as being this lightning rod of anger and
no chance. No chance. People, I think, look enviously when they hear more and more about the Norwegian standard of life, the Norwegian economy, the Norwegian public services, and then think to themselves, well, wait a minute, they're smaller than us, they've got the same oil resources as us, but yet they're a way up higher as far as standard of life.
And they have a sovereign wealth fund. I mean,
everything going for them. Child poverty is minuscule. Not just Norway, but places like Sweden, places like Denmark, minuscule. The Nordic countries have got much less of these problems than we have, and yet we're the one that's the rich nation. On paper, we're the country that should be the richest in the whole of Europe, and yet we're one of the poorest in the whole of Europe. So it's absolutely a no-brainer, Mark, that we go for independence. What I'm saying to you is, I think the more you try to be definitive about the type of independence that you go for, then the more you open yourself up to division about, I don't actually agree with that T, and I don't want to cross that T, and I don't want to dot that I. I think it's much better to have people like me arguing fundamentally, I want an independent socialist Scotland. I want a democratic socialist republic. That's what I want. I want a modern republic. That's what I want. But by the way, it's not going to get foisted upon you, because you'll get a vote on that. You'll get a vote on to determine these things after independence, when these things actually matter. The first and foremost thing we need to do, Mark, is get us over the line. And the problem we're beginning to get to in my opinion, Brilla, is that you've got people politically leading us now who, frankly, I now have major doubts want to ever see an independent Scotland, because they're doing damn nothing to get us an independent Scotland.
Yeah, well, let's go through a few of the questions while we still have time. Hi, Tommy. What's the odds on Boris Johnson seeing out his term? Do you think we will see a new PM before the next general election, as it seems the Tories are circumventing the standard political setup of changing the prime minister every general election? Is this going to be the new norm?
To answer that question, I never caught who'd asked it, sorry. But to answer that question, the truth is it's irrelevant, Mark, because it doesn't matter who they replace him with. It'll be another horrible, cutting, anti-Scotland, anti-working class individual who represents the ruling class and the rich. Boris Johnson is probably, in my opinion, the worst equipped individual to ever be a prime minister, ever, in British history. But he's there. And he's there because he's doing the bidding of the ruling class. The ruling class are getting fed up with him. It's quite clearly they're beginning to be a bit embarrassed by him. And they may ditch him. There's a big chance he could get ditched before the next election. But you know what? It won't matter a jot to ordinary people struggling on a carer's wage, people struggling on a housing waiting list, people who are going to a school that's overcrowded. It won't matter a jot who replaces him, because nothing will improve. It'll simply be more of the same. In fact, things are going to get worse. Things are going to get more unequal. Things are going to get tougher. Public services are going to be starved even more of finances. So the idea that we have any time to wait here is simply not an option. Those who say, let's wait and I hear people say, oh, wait till we get the polls up over 50% and all the rest of it. For a start, the polls have been over 50% for a significant period over the last 6 months. But secondly, and much more importantly, the people who are saying wait are the ones that can afford to wait. Their lives only getting affected by the horrible union that we've got. The people who can't afford to wait are the low paid, are the unemployed, are the people whose jobs are in threat because they're in public services. So from my point of view, we cannot wait, because there are far too many people who are suffering the consequences of this union right now.
Okay. McIver Q, Tommy, after I heard you speak in 2014, a few months before a referendum, I decided I wanted to have the same passion for my country as you shared that night. I voted yes. When do you think we'll be having another referendum? So,
well, thanks very much, McIver. I had a great pleasure to address many meetings during the 2014 referendum campaign. I managed to clock up 121 meetings. My wife counted them because she was always complaining that I was never in the house, and I neglected some of my chores, like taking the bins out and things like that. So I often got a hard time. And I also missed nearly a year of my wee daughter growing up, wee Gabrielle. And I felt really sad about that. I started, towards the end of that campaign, I started trying to insist that Gail and Gabrielle came with me to all the meetings, which was great, although Gabrielle then started to say, Dad, I don't want to come. I've heard it all before. So she was a great critic as far as the speeches were concerned. But the point is this, McIver, we had a brilliant opportunity in 14, and we nearly did it despite all of the odds. The odds were all against us, and we nearly defied the odds. I think we've got a chance in 2022. I think it's too late now in 2021. I'd love to see it this September. I really would. But I don't think it's going to happen. I'd love to see the announcement be made, however, in September, that it's going to be in a 12-month period, and that we're going to have it in 2022, and that we're going to build up towards it. We're going to have a big campaign. Even if we had a 6-month instead of a 12-month campaign, I would love it. But we need to get people on the street, McIver. Personally, if we don't mobilise, if we don't get people in the street, then the SNP government's going to say, the appetite maybe isn't there. You know, people voted for us, but they just voted for us to run society. They didn't vote for independence. It's a misinterpretation of why people vote SNP. People don't vote SNP, in my opinion, because they love devolution. They vote SNP because they think Scotland is an independent country that has the ability to run its own affairs. And the SNP, in my opinion, is taking the vote for granted, and they ought to look over their shoulder at what happened to New Labour. New Labour, Mark, I mean, people often forget this because things happen so quickly and then other events run into it. But in 2015, the May election of 2015, the general election, Labour went into that election with 41 MPs. 41 MPs. They left that election with one MP. They were absolutely trounced, demolished. They took their voters for granted and they punished them. Eventually, that was a process. That was happening over many, many years. The SNP ought to beware. They are not beyond that type of process if they continue to take their voters for granted.
Yeah. Okay. What's your thoughts on us as sovereigns appealing to the UN as a nation, not using our governing polities as our party as our spokesperson? Would our voices be legally recognized as a plea to assist us to end the union? In other words, or more as general, which I wanted to get to, what are alternate ways of achieving independence if this Section 30 thing is continually denied?
Well, Mark, the problem with that approach, I'm awful sorry, but if I was the UN, I would say no. I wouldn't recognise you. Why? Because 7 years ago you had a referendum where you could have voted for your independence, and sadly, 55% voted to stay part of the British Union. So without that democratic fulcrum, without that referendum that I believe we require, we don't have the right to go to the UN or anybody else and say, we're asking you to recognise your sovereignty. Because if I was part of the 55, if I was one of the unionists, I'd be saying, hey, how dare you? We had that vote. We voted against it. So I think there has to be a wee bit of a reality check here. The whole issue of breaking the British Union has to be done democratically, in my opinion. We've seen what has happened in other countries where they had to raise arms to get their independence. Very, very rarely will the exploiters give independence to the exploited. They have to demand it. The way we demand it, I think, has to be peaceful. It has to be via the ballot box rather than via the armour light or any other weapon. So from my point of view, Mark, I don't think we can go to the UN until after the next referendum. If you were to say to me, and here's a different scenario, Scottish Parliament announces there's going to be a new referendum in 2022, whether it be June 2022, September 2022, we have the referendum and the unionists decide to try and boycott it, and some of them don't take part in it, but over 50% of the Scottish population do take part of it, and over 60% of the Scottish population vote yes. Then you go to the UN, then you go to all the other international organisations and say, we ask you to recognise your sovereignty. But until we've got that in the bank, I don't think we can do that, Mark.
Okay. That's been about an hour. So first of all, I'd like to just say, is there anything else you'd like to conclude? Any good vibes to send us away with in what is? Mark,
first of all, thanks for the opportunity to have a chat, brother. As I say, it's one of those rare times we're actually basking in sunshine, which helps to take away some of the depression that we have in relation to the lack of progress as far as independence is concerned. I've personally taken the step. I'm the convener of a socialist party called Solidarity, but I've also joined the Alaba party because I believe it's a fundamental, urgent party for independence. It wants to promote independence. I'm going to go to the conference in September, and I'm hoping that they will adopt a very firm set of policies that will be left of centre policies, that will be putting some urgency into the question of independence. And if that happens, then it may become the new political force. But regardless of that political project, I would argue that those in the movement who are in one party or in no party, you have to hit the streets again. So please put in your diaries, 19th of September, Sunday, 19th September. Get yourself along to Freedom Square in Glasgow and join thousands of others there. We'll have a whole screed of performing artists, bands, and individual artists who entertain us for hours and hours. We'll have some good speeches as well. Hopefully we'll have some good weather. And we will have the ability to stand united again and to say to the SNP government loud and clear, we have given you the mandate. We've given you 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 mandates. You must use this one. You're in the last chance saloon. That's my opinion, by the way. The SNP don't deliver.
You're not the only one.
If I get my vote again,
You're not the only
in the
one.
last chance saloon. So please come along on the 19th of September and let's put pressure on for IndyRef2, Mark. Been a pleasure speaking to you, brother.
All right, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and look forward to having you back anytime.
Take care.